For this discussion, let's imagine that you and I are partners, and at the moment, you're managing all of our customers. So customers call, you respond to them, you keep your notes on what's going on, all the details. And then if you go away on vacation or have to step away, I'm supposed to take over. Now, how in the world do I take over all that stuff you're doing unless I know what you are doing? Well, the firewalls and an HA pair have the same problem. And that's why we're going to use links to replicate and synchronize information between the active and passive device in an active-passive HA pair. And here is how the replication is done between the Palo Alto firewalls is by using HA or high availability links. Now, on some hardware, they have dedicated links that are actually labeled. For example, HA1 for high availability link 1 and HA2 for high availability link 2. So that's pretty straightforward if you have those links, but if you're on a device that doesn't have dedicated hardware for those ports, we need to do this trick right here, and that is borrow. Not borrow, it's really take. We need to take some interfaces that are usually used for data plane traffic, like, Ethernet 1/4, 1/5, etc., and we need to specify those are a type of HA, and once we do that, we can then set up those interfaces that used to be for data plane traffic once they're identified as type HA, and then we can specify, okay, we're going to use this interface, for example, 1/4 for HA1, we're going to use the 1/5 interface for HA2, etc. So regardless if we have hardware with ports that are labeled as those links, or we're using data plane interfaces for that purpose, either way, the concept is the same. So let's take a look at each of these links, and let me explain what they do and what their purpose is. So let's start with HA, and I'll color code these as well. High availability link number 1. That is referred to as the control link. And it has several uses, including config changes. So for this discussion, let's imagine that firewall 1 is currently active. And if we make changes, let's imagine we modify a security rule, or we modify a NAT policy, or we modify a security profile. Whatever it is, if we modify it here on firewall 1, firewall 2 needs to know about that. So on firewall 1, when we commit the changes, it's going to use HA1, that link between them, to synchronize those changes down to the other firewall. It's also on that HA1 link, it's also going to do heartbeats and hellos as these two firewalls check on the status of each other. But the config part of it would be going from the active device down to the other one, while heartbeats and hellos can go bidirectionally. And that HA1 is a layer 3 link, which implies it's going to need an IP address. So they can check on each other and say hello and so forth. So those are some of the major components that are done over the HA link number 1. So the next challenge is we may have a user out here who is currently sending traffic through the firewall. And behind the scenes, it would be the active firewall that's actually forwarding that traffic on behalf of the user. And if you've joined me in the other PCNSE, the admin course, where we looked at the session browser, it's very likely there's going to be tons and tons of session-related information real time between users and the resources they're trying to reach going through the firewall. So if this active firewall fails and there's a failover event, when firewall 2 takes over, it's going to need that information, that session information, if we don't want to disrupt that user session. And that's where HA2 comes into play. High availability link number 2 is referred to as the data link. And one of its primary functions is to synchronize session information. And I'm going to add live there just to help reinforce what that's for. So if the user is currently going through firewall 1, all that session information is being replicated down to firewall 2, just in case firewall 2 has to go active and will have the information so it can continue to support the data plane on behalf of the user. And the question might come up, well, what if we lose this link, HA1 or HA2? What do we do? Well, we would be in trouble. And that's why there's also options for backups for both of them. So we can have a primary HA1 and then set up a backup HA1 and then have a primary HA2 link and then a backup HA2 link. And that way, if we do lose a link or a connection there, we can have a backup that can continue to function. So if I draw those in, it'd be like this. There's our backup HA1. And for HA2, there's our backup HA2. And regarding HA1, if we're working with a model of the firewall that doesn't have a dedicated link and we're borrowing interfaces from the data plane, we could also double up on the actual management interface on the Palo Alto firewall and use that for the HA1 in addition to its normal management functions. So that's yet another option if we don't have a dedicated hardware HA1 interface. All right, next let's talk about HA3. So if we are setting up active, where both firewalls are responsible and supporting the data plane for certain flows of traffic, that's when we're going to use the HA3. And one of its uses is to support asymmetric routing. So let's imagine that user 1 sends traffic out and it goes over this path over firewall A, and the reply traffic coming back is coming in through firewall 2. Well, because firewall 1 hasn't failed and it has the session information for user 1, really it should be firewall 1 that's handling that return path. And so using the HA3 link, firewall 2 can go ahead and forward that up to firewall 1, who can then continue forwarding it back. So think of HA3 as the link that you only need if you're going to deploy active-active, and it's also referred to as the packet forwarding link. There's also some other activity that happens on that link with active-active, but that's the major reason for it, is to handle asymmetrical routing in a scenario where we have a pair that's set up as active-active. And the last one, which is high availability link number 4, it only is applicable if we are using clusters. And one of its functions is to sync information across the cluster. So as I mentioned in the previous video, we could have up to 16 firewalls in a cluster. So there's some synchronization that happens there. There's also some keep alives that happen there on that HA4 link. So they have the ability to identify if somebody else in the cluster is having a problem. So the great news is that for most environments where we're going to be implementing an active-passive HA pair, just 2 firewalls, the only 2 link types that we really need to worry about is the HA1 to synchronize our configurations, and the HA2, which is used to synchronize the session information in real time between the active and the other device in the pair. Again, in preparation so that if the other firewall has to go active, it has that session information in real time so it can continue to support the user. So now that we've had a chance to take a look at the big picture of high availability, and in this video, take a look at the actual link interfaces that are used to support it. In the next video, let's go ahead and put a plan together regarding setting up high availability, and then we'll follow that plan in the subsequent videos in this set of videos and put it together and verify that it works. So I'll see you in the next video in just a few moments. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.